Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining this week's Semantic Kernel Office Hours. I'm going to go ahead and dive in. We want to welcome those who may be joining for the first time. If you are, we want to go over that we meet weekly on Wednesdays from 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific time to be able to dive into any questions that you have and present out some of our updates and latest releases as well. We also have a monthly instance of that as well on the second Wednesday of every month from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, and that's for folks who are based in our APAC time region as well. In between our office hours, please feel free to reach out using GitHub discussions. We go through and triage both discussions and any issues that are created daily. And so it's a great way to be able to get in contact with us in between these sessions as well. So I'm going to put some links in chat for all of you. The first one is around our recent releases. And so on our Python side, I want to highlight that we have a recent release of 1.29.0. And so there are some new features, the ability to clone a kernel. This is now parity across both .NET and Python. There is support for process state management and the ability to add Brave search capabilities in Python based on a PR that was merged. There are some other enhancements and items here, but if you haven't had a chance to go through and look at the latest Python release, we do highly recommend you take a second to go through and do that. And both of the releases for .NET and Python are in that first link that I shared. On the .NET side, there are some changes in terms of MEBD that we'll dive into with both Wesley and Shai on the call and some updates from our latest release there. And then there's also some fixes and other items that are within the .NET package. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at the latest 1.48.0, we recommend you take a minute to go through and do that. With that, I'm going to dive into a couple of our blogs. We've had a number of customer case studies and guest blogs. And so there is a great case study of internal Microsoft adoption of Semantic Kernel for Microsoft Store Assistant. And so this goes through their journey they've been on with Semantic Kernel. And so if you haven't had a chance to look at that, we recommend you do. And then we also have our guest blog. There's a great one around accessibility of being able to use Semantic Kernel and be able to go through for analyzing websites for accessibility. And so there's a great demo there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wesley to go through a bit of the updates to him and Shai. So Wesley, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Sophia. So yesterday we released the second preview of the Microsoft Extensions vector data package, plus updates to all of the implementations of that we own internally. There are, of course, external implementations as well, and they will certainly be implementing these changes as time goes on. I wanted to highlight just some of the most important changes that we've made, or some of the most important improvements, I suppose, and I'll also at the end talk a little bit about some of the changes that has meant we've had to make to the abstractions. Our hope is that this is the last preview, and the next release will hopefully be an actual GA version. But yeah, there's a lot of great stuff in here, specifically integrated embedding generation for upsearch and search, supporting just a dictionary object for models, getting records with filters and schemaless collection, existent lead collection features. I'm gonna turn over to Shai for a sec for the first two items there to talk through, since he worked on most of the he did most of the work on that, and then I can talk about the other two once it's done. Shai, over to you.
Thanks, Wesley. So sure, starting with the first.
Can you go to the next slide, by the way, Sophia?
Oh, yeah. Good point there. Right. So just before we dive into the code, just to give an overview conceptually of what this is, integrating embedding generation is a feature where we basically push down into MEVD, into the Microsoft Extensions vector data, the task of generating embeddings for your texts. So the main thing that's important here, the main insight here is that embedding generation is something that many users don't necessarily want to handle manually. Up to now, you had to have a read-only memory memory of float, which is the raw representation for an embedding. It's basically an array of floats, right? You had to have a property like that on your .NET type, which you're mapping to the database. And then it was up to you to, for example, use OpenAI or any other embedding generator to take a text, to generate embeddings out of it, and then you get out the array of floats, and then you assign that to your .NET type, and then at that point you can upsert it, and so on. Similarly for searching, you had to first do the step outside of MEVD. That was your own problem. You had to first call the OpenAI embedding generator, pass it a text, get back the array of floats, and then you can do a search given that float. The insight here in general is that this is something that most users should not care about. They use this abstraction to basically search, do similarity searches over text. So we want the abstraction itself, we want the package itself to take care of that for you. So the new thing here, if you look at the finance info type that you have below, before, the embedding that you had there had to be, we validated this, it had to be a read-only memory of float. So you had to provide a property which contained like the raw embedding type, right? And what you'll notice now is something that might look a little bit strange at first sight, and it's basically that you've got a string there. So the embedding now has a type of a string, which obviously this is not the raw embedding type anymore, right? So it's a representation where you just assign the string. And the nice thing about it is that you don't have to care. You don't even have to see the read-only memory of float. You don't know that it's an array of floats anywhere, and everything gets taken care of for you. So how does this work? It's pretty simple. All you have to do is you have to wire things up. You have to tell us what the embedding generator is. And this is the line that you see above. So now we can actually look at this code from the very top. So first of all, we create an embedding generator. In this case, we're going to configure an OpenAI embedding generator. It can be anything. You choose the model, you parameterize it, you give it the endpoint. For now, you still have to do this as embedding generator call. That will disappear later. We're going to make this even nicer. Now you've got your embedding generator, right? This you would have done also previously, like you would have to create an embedding generator. But now when you create your quadrant vector store, notice that we are now configuring the embedding generator with the quadrant vector store. So your vector store, the thing that you use to interact with the database, is now aware of your embedding, of your chosen embedding generator. And that setting acts as a default. So any property here, like the embedding one, that's a string, that's not itself a read-only memory of float, will implicitly use this embedding generator. So all you have to do is at the point where you set up your vector store, you tell us what embedding generator you want. And from that point on, all of the APIs are just going to work with strings. So the first API that you see there is, we get the collection and then we do the upsert. And you can see that we just set the text and the embedding generator kicks in and everything is done for you under the hood. For search, things are a tiny bit more interesting. There is now a new method. We've done some renaming because of this change. Previously, we had what's called vectorized and vectorizable search. We had two methods like this. Things have shifted around a tiny bit. The method is now called search async, and you give it whatever you need, typically a string. This is the method that you use when you want embedding generation to happen under the hood. There's also, of course, we don't force you to use this mode at all. If you want, you can do it just like it was before. You can also call a search embedding async API. And at that point, you're just giving it the read-only memory of float just like before, and you're working in raw in the raw mode just like before. But we suspect that most users, like the simple case, this will actually match the intended usage. And the nice thing about this is nowhere in this API do you ever see actually dealing with read-only memory of span, calling generate on that embedding generator. This is all kind of done implicitly for you, and we take care of it for you. There's quite a bit of machinery under the hood, and there's quite a bit of nuance. For example, you might need two different embedding generators here, and there's provisions for varying embedding generators on a property per property basis. So there's a lot of flexibility here, which I'm not going to go into because this is just a general kind of overview of the feature. But the takeaway is that this layer has become a bit more high level. We basically allow you to delegate more of the work to us now and make your code simpler and not have to worry about the actual ceremony and drudgery of embedding, of generating embeddings every place where you want to do a search or an upsert. That's basically the presentation of this feature. I don't know if we want to pause for questions. Maybe we should, right? On a feature per feature kind of thing. If anybody has any questions about this.
Yeah, definitely. Feel free to come off of mute if anyone has questions or put them in chat as well. We'd love to hear from you.
A question.
Just a quick question on, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, a little latency here. My quick question is this. If if I'm using, say, the embedding 3 large model from OpenAI, and I want to only store 256 dimensions of the vector instead of the 3072, say, will it pick up on that somehow, or do I get to indicate whether I want the full vector, the maximum resolution
Right.
expression, or if I can shorten it?
So the way this works is whatever the embedding generator you've configured outputs is the thing that's going to get sent to the database. And typically, you should be able to configure your embedding generator when you instantiate it. That's the first line here. That's where you should be able to tell your embedding generator, I want, this, number of dimensions, or quantize it. I'm not familiar specifically with, that scenario that you're saying, but that is where I would assume that to be. If you have an embedding generator that generates X dimensions and you want to yourself quantize it down to a smaller number, then you're dropping out of this automatic story and you have to do that yourself, right? We don't do MEVD, like the abstraction doesn't have provisions for quantizing for you. But as far as I know, like the typical usage that we're seeing and hearing from users is they want the embedding generator's output to go into the database rather than us doing some additional processing after that. So what you basically asked is, I think, more a question to your specific embedding generator implementation and what you can configure there, rather than something that MEVD would do for you, at least at this point. I hope that makes sense.
Makes sense. It does make sense. Thank you.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I think that was something else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is really good. So because now when you do the upsert and search, you're automatically calling the embedding generator behind the scene to create the embeddings and then put it in the collection or search, right? So I have another question is, like, for example, Quadrant has the metadata filtering capability, right? When you do a search. Can you do this here? I only see 2 parameters here, the vector, the search query, and the top results. Can you do metadata filtering and things like that? That's part of Quadrant. Can you make that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So regardless of whether you're using this new integrated embedding generation or not, that's like an orthogonal thing. If you look at the search async, there's actually a third optional parameter, which we're not using here, to pass more options. There's all kinds of other options, and one of them is the filtering one. And that's something that we support actually on all our connector implementations. So all vector databases support some form of filtering. The precise, constructs and query features that are supported vary, but all of them do some, at least, some equality checks and whatever, and that is supported. You actually, so this is something we showed, I think, in the last office hours. You basically you're using LINQ, you use C# code with LINQ expression trees without going too much into it, to basically express that you want to only get finance infos where some field is greater than 8 or whatever. So that is fully supported. I will, assuming that answered the question, I do want to point out one last thing before we go on to the next feature. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but one thing that you'll notice here, if you look at the finance info below, is that we've got embedding, and that's actually pointing to another property called text. And what's happening here is that we're basically, this is a case where we want the string to be stored both as data and also as the embedding. And the reason for this is a tiny bit more tricky. You don't have to do this. If you only have an embedding property that's a string, then we'll do everything and we'll convert your string into an embedding. But at that point, the string is no longer present as a string in the database. The moment you've converted it into an embedding, it goes into the database as an embedding. You can't go back from an embedding to a string, right? You can't reconstruct the string source, right? So if you want to query the string back when you're searching for records, then you've basically lost that string at that point, right? So what you're seeing here is this data model that you're seeing below has the assumption that you want the same string to be used both as a regular text field that can be selected out of the database and search results, and also be used as the source, as the input for vector generation for similarity search, right? So that's kind of the story that we're proposing here for people who want the same text to be both present as a filterable, fetchable string in the database, like a normal string metadata kind of thing, and also be used as input for embedding generation. That's kind of like a point I wanted to, because it is a tiny bit, that's the one tiny bit confusing aspect of this feature. But if you don't care about that string, and all you want is to serve as your embedding inputs, then you don't need that text property that you see there, and you'll just have a string embedding property that's itself gettable, settable, and you set the string, and that just gets saved to the database as a vector, as an embedding. I hope that's all clear.
Is there any capability to do chunking of the text? Do we have in semantic kernel any tools or anything to chunk the text when the context window is larger, or do we have to do that manually with whatever we want to do? Yeah.
Right. So at this, go ahead, Wesley.
Yeah, we don't really have much by the way of chunking tools at the moment. I can definitely recommend having a look at some of the chunking tools that are in kernel memory, and maybe grabbing some of those. But yeah, in semantic kernel, we don't really have much by the way of that.
Yeah, I'll also say that we also think that chunking is something that is that belongs at a higher level than this. So this is just a low-level database API for vector databases, and you just give it strings. If you chose to chunk or whatever, that's kind of like a higher level concern. So I wouldn't expect this to be something that is found on the API of this package specifically, which of course doesn't mean that we won't have some higher level abstractions or helpers above that you can layer on top.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Unless there's anything else, we can, I think, move to the next feature, which is probably going to be shorter. Yeah. All right. So let's go to the next slide then. So the next thing, this one is going to probably be interesting only to a minority of semantic kernel users. But the idea is this. In what you saw before in the slide just before, you had a .NET type, and that got mapped to the database record, right? That's like a very statically typed approach where there's a fixed schema, which in code is represented by a .NET type. So you list out in .NET, I have one property called price and it's an int, and I have another property called name and it's a string, and so on. That's like a very ORM strongly typed kind of story, a bit like for people who know Entity Framework in the .NET world, it's a bit similar to this. That works great for many scenarios where you have a specific product you're building and you've got a very specific schema that you've designed, and now you want to map that schema to the database, and everything is pretty simple and clear. But there are scenarios where you don't have a fixed schema. Specifically, if you're writing a general layer that can work with any vector database, or maybe you want some sort of tool where the schema comes from some external JSON configuration, right? Like the user can use a UI to, define the schema and add fields, and then they want to apply that to the database. That kind of more general tools or layers, they don't have, it's not appropriate there to have a .NET type that represents your schema, because there is no fixed schema. Basically, it should work with any schema. And for this, we have what I'm going to call here dynamic mapping. Now, semantic kernel already, this whole layer, semantic kernel and the vector database abstraction already had a story for this. This was called the generic data model. There was a generic record data model type that you could use for this. I suspect not many of you have had to use that type. We've done quite a few changes around this and obsoleted that type, and we've basically aligned with various other packages as well, where the kind of standard way to do this sort of thing in .NET is simply to have a dictionary of string to object, where the key here is the name of the field, and the value is object. It can be absolutely anything at all, right? So instead of having a .NET type, you basically map a dictionary to the database, and that allows you to be completely dynamic in the way that you work. Now, it's worth mentioning, the fact that this is dynamic doesn't mean that there's no idea of a schema. So if we look at the code, you see that we still have a vector store record definition. So there's still a thing that says there's a key property called key, and it's a string. And then there's a text property that's a metadata, and it's also a string. And there's an embedding that's a read-only memory of float with this and that dimension. This is still very much, a schema approach. This is not some sort of schema-less throw anything into the database and it will somehow make sense of it. That doesn't work. The databases do have schemas in general. So you do have to still declare upfront what fields there are, what are their types, what are their, the vector dimensions, what similarity function you want to use. All that actually still has to be done, but you no longer require a .NET type in order to interact with the database. So the API, what you're seeing here, this is still subject to change. So there's still one more change. Rather than doing get collection, it's going to look a bit different, but it doesn't really matter. What you can see is we're basically getting a collection, the same thing like before, but instead of having a user type like the finance info that you saw before, the key is an object and the value is a dictionary of string to object. So the record, the type that we're mapping is the dictionary, and the key is an object. It can be anything. And then we're mapping that to a finances collection in the database, and we're giving the record definition. Note that in this case, you must provide a record definition. You must provide that thing. There's no .NET type with attributes that you can use. You can't use the attributes anymore to define your schema because there is no .NET type to annotate with attributes in the first place, right? So the record definition becomes mandatory. And then at that point, you can interact again exactly in the same way. So here we're instantiating a dictionary. You can see that we're doing basically the same thing. We're just creating a dictionary with three key value pairs, basically. So there's three fields. And then we're upserting that record. It's just that the record, instead of being a finance info type, will now be a dictionary. And everything works as before. You can get it back and you get back your dictionary. You can do the search as before. Everything is exactly the same. It's just that you're using a dictionary instead of a strongly typed type as your record type, basically. And that's it. That's all that this feature is about. Once again, most people doing a specific product with a specific schema will not care about this and don't need to worry about it. But some people doing more things along the lines of generic tools, things and UIs that interact with any vector database where the schema is not fixed, then this is for you. I'll pause for any questions.
Is it possible to combine that? Let's say I have an object, but one of the field record is a dictionary. So I have a type of like the previous model, but I want to add one field, which is a dictionary string. Is it possible to combine, or you have to choose one or the other?
You, at least at this point, you have to choose one or the other. And the problem is also whether that's going to be supported is also going to kind of depend on your database as well. If it like this sort of mixing of strongly typed and non-strongly typed, if this is something that that is of interest, then definitely log an issue and we'll consider that. Like this is something we can think about in the future. But at this point, this is you're either dynamic or you're not. I would recommend, like, if you do have some sort of dynamic area like this, then for now just go all dynamic, like rather than trying to combine the two approaches, at least for now. All right, I think I'll hand it back to you, Wesley, right? You want to speak to the other features?
Yeah, thanks, Shai. Sophia, do you want to move to the next slide, please? So this is another feature that we're shipping. Our colleague that worked on this is unfortunately not here today, so can't speak about it himself, but I'll talk to it as best as possible. So ultimately, this feature allows us to, well, currently, you can do vector searches. You can do vector searches with text input that get vectorized in the database. You can do get for individual records, both in a batch and non-batch mode. But a feature that was missing, which some people have been asking for, is just doing a regular kind of search with filtering that isn't a vector search, that has custom ordering and so on. And this is the feature that we're adding here. So as you can see there, on the record collection, there is a new method called getAsync, which is in addition to what we've already supported, and it takes a filter clause as a parameter, which allows you to decide, to filter on the properties on the record. Obviously, it's important for a lot of databases to indicate that which fields you want to index, because without indexing, a lot of the vector databases don't support filtering on those properties, and you do that via adding the isIndexed setting onto the vector store record data attribute below. There's two mandatory parameters here. There's the filter, and there's a top parameter that is mandatory, and then there's a third optional parameter, which is options, which you can provide various settings within, including skip and order by, which is really valuable, of course. Here I probably should have added as a sample, but order by here is really valuable in that it allows you to for example, order by a timestamp or something like that. Let's say you want to read through the entire database and check, process any records, and you want to make sure that you've processed the latest records. You can order by timestamp, which means that, if your service fails, you can save the last timestamp that was processed, and you can recover from there and start again. This sort of stuff is obviously really handy. Any questions on that?
Is it possible to do hybrid search in this?
Yeah, we already support hybrid search. It is not part of this feature, obviously, but yeah, this is already something that we support. I can post a link to our documentation on that in the chat.
Great, thanks for the question. Any other questions folks have?
I have a quick question on Quadrant. Do we still only support gRPC, or do we support the other? Is it only port 6334, or do we do both?
We currently only support gRPC, but if it's something that, if you need to be able to use it with, without gRPC, definitely log an issue. It's not something we've considered, but definitely log an issue, and we can have a look into that.
It's good, but it's kind of it takes a little bit of an effort to set up the gRPC for Quadrant. Mm-hmm. That's why, yeah.
Okay, next slide, please, Sophia. So this is the last one that I'm going to dive into in a little bit more detail. It's a very simple one, in fairness. Before we supported collection exists and delete collection on the collection object itself, which means that if you just to check if something exists or delete, you need to provide a data model or a definition, which is kind of painful when really we don't need this for checking if a collection exists or to delete it. So we have also added these methods onto the vector store object. So now it's possible to use vector store dot list collection names, loop through the results, and then decide whether you want to delete it, for example, without having to get a collection object at all. The collection exists and delete collection methods are, of course, still also on the collection itself. We're not removing those. One other thing that before I continue, any questions on this? Should be a simple one anyway, so I'll keep going, and I just wanted to show one final thing quickly. Let me just share my screen. Can people see the browser window here?
I can. Can others as well?
Yep, I can see
some thumbs up.
Thanks very much. So this should be published in later today. Actually, it's some of it is already published, some of our updates, and I've made some more updates to this page specifically that people can have a look at. This details all of the updates in this April 2025 preview 2 update for the vector store changes. It goes into more detail on configuring an embedding generator with all of the different options, plus a more detailed example. It talks about the changes that Shai was mentioning around, how we changed the method names from vectorized search to search embedding async. We've also changed the return type for search methods. It used to be a wrapper object around a async enumerable, which was a little bit painful to use. we now return just an async enumerable, just to make things a little bit simpler. You know, we support the get async, which I talked about, the filtered get. The new collection exists and delete collection methods. We've also renamed the batch methods to just be the same as the others. So instead of get batch, it's just get, delete batch, it's just delete. It's just different overloads of the same method essentially. So we still have get with a single key, but now we also have get with an enumerable of keys and get with a filter, and then delete with a list of keys, delete async with a single key, and so on. We've also changed the return type for the batch upsert method. Again, in this case, it was returning an async enumerable of key, but we've changed it to task of read-only list of key. This is quite an important change because if you did not enumerate the async enumerable all the way to the end when doing an upsert, it meant that your code would continue potentially before all of the methods were upserted. So you had to use it in a very specific way in order to get it to work the way you would expect it to. Whereas now you would just await, do a single await on the response, and it will continue. It will finish when all of the upserts are finished, which is a lot safer of a usage scenario. And also, most people didn't really need the async enumerable response for upsert batch, so this is definitely a good change. Collection name property has been changed to name. Then is filterable and is full text searchable. These properties on the data attributes and data record property for the definitions have just been renamed to is indexed and is full text indexed. And one more thing, finally, I think this is almost the last one. We now require you to specify the set of dimensions for a vector, both when you use an attribute as well as when you use the definition. So instead of it being optional, it is now required. And we made this change because for pretty much all scenarios, you do need this. We were kind of saying, well, if you're before we would throw, in the cases where you if you don't specify it, we'll throw in the cases where you needed it but you didn't specify it, but that's pretty much 90% of the cases. So we now require this to make it to be able to give errors and warnings earlier in the process. And finally, when constructing a collection directly, all of them now require the key type to be specified. So I'll show an example here if I can. Let's see if there is one. Yeah, so for example, when creating a concordant vector store record collection, for most of these implementations, you could create this and just specify your record and not specify a key. Because of the changes with the dynamic, the dictionary support, this is now required for all of them. And that's pretty much it. Any questions on these final few items? I know I ran through them quickly, but I want to make sure there's time for other questions as well if people have them.
Not seeing anything in chat. I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to come off of mute if you have questions for Wesley, or feel free to put them in chat as well and I can read them out.
And if not, over back to you, Sophia, for maybe more general questions.
Perfect. I'm just sharing back out. I see in chat, Rasmus, that's great to hear that you were able to do the migrations today and was straightforward as well. Any other insight that you or others have that have tried it out? Would love to hear from you of your thoughts. Looks like we have a hand up, so we'll transition to that. Rasmus, feel free to put anything else in chat of what you found with the migration. Would love to hear from the individual with your hand up if you want to come off of mute.
Hi. So I have a question about telemetry and logging in Semantic Kernel. So we are trying some use cases, and big part of it is monitor the logs with custom properties because we want to run multiple sessions in parallel and also monitor them. So I wanted to ask, is there a way to feed our custom logger to Semantic Kernel? Because with current implementation, there is not much flexibility to add custom properties to the logs of Semantic Kernel.
Yeah, really good question. We have Talon on the Python side for telemetry and observability, but I didn't know, are you using a .NET or Python?
Python.
Okay, perfect. Well, over to you for how you'd recommend with some of the telemetry and observability work you've done.
Yeah, thank you, Sophia. When you say properties, custom property, what do you mean you want to add custom properties to your logger? Can you provide more details? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So for example, for all the logs, we want to have, for example, the session ID or for example, the user ID of the current user that are using the system so that we can, for example, extract all logs for a specific session.
And you want, and where are you doing the logging in your application? Are you saying you want Semantic Kernel to do the logging for the session, the user ID for you, or?
Yeah, so my understanding is that current implementation, all the functions had one logger at the top level that they log the semantic kernel logs. And if we want to extract those, we use the root logger to extract those logs. So when I want to extract those logs, before adding those to the, for example, application insights, I want to inject my own custom properties to the all logs, for example, session ID, user ID, and those things.
I see. I don't think right now there is a way for you to inject. I will have to look into this if it's possible to inject property from the root logger and then it propagates to all the children. But I think one thing you can do is to create. So if you want to group all the logs of one request, you can and then create an parent activity and then and then add your user ID as an attribute to that activity, and then underneath that activity, all the logs will be associated to that activity. So when you're doing the parsing or when you're doing querying, you can use that activity with the user ID, and then you can query those logs, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I understanding, but yeah. Is it okay if I follow up afterwards also to get more insights about this problem?
Yeah. You can definitely follow up with me offline.
Thank you so much.
Is this something we can do through the open telemetry capabilities, or that's not a good fit for this?
Well, open telemetry is just a way for you to, well, the two aspects of open telemetry is a way for you to send telemetry, parse telemetry. The other way is it has the convention to define, what attributes you need to include for the kind of task you want. For example, Gen AI, right? There's also database. I think it doesn't matter what telemetry you're using. I think she just wants to see to group the logs with one user ID or one session ID.
Okay.
Maybe one thought on the OpenTelemetry side. OpenTelemetry includes tracing as well. And one of the nice parts of tracing is that when, or activities are tracing, depending which terminology you want, but traces are nested within one another. So one typical way to do this is in the application, when you start handling a user request, this is an application thing, it has nothing to do with semantic kernel. You say, okay, I'm starting, for example, I'm handling a web request now by this and this user, and you're in charge, the application developer, of the message and the tags that go inside. And then if you then call an API in semantic kernel, which also reports an activity, that gets nested inside the bigger one. And you can visually even see that the database access, which itself doesn't know anything about the web request or the user or anything like that, it's just a low-level database request. It's visually nested within the the web request, which is the one that provides all the user information and all that. So like tracing via OpenTelemetry can be a way to kind of correlate these events together simply because they're naturally nested.
Yeah, that's exactly what I meant. Tracing and activity, there are different terminologies, but yeah, essentially,
right.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, everything underneath the activity you create, you can query it or you can visualize it, and you can do all sorts of things with it. Yeah. But yeah, feel free to ping me offline if you have further questions.
Thank you so much.
Other questions folks may have. I see there have been some good points in chat. I'm not seeing any questions there right now. Any other questions? Feel free to come off with me. We'd love to hear from you. If there aren't any other questions folks have, we may end office hours a little bit early today. I'll stay on for a minute or two more just to make sure no one's typing or coming off of mute, but I'm not seeing any more questions in chat, so do let us know if you have anything else. If not, we'll stick around. I see a hand up. Logan, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, it's just a general question. So I'm using Aspire, and I'm also using obviously to try and integrate it with an MCP server. And that MCP that I'm using is using the remote.
Hey, Logan, it might just be on my end, but it's really breaking up for your audio. Are others having a hard time with it, or is it just on my end?
Yeah,
On
I
my
can't
end
hear
too.
either.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you mind, Logan, putting it in chat for your question? Is that okay?
It'll take me a minute to type. It's quite a
Okay,
big one.
yeah, no problem.
Can I follow up by email if someone put the email in the chat?
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Yeah.
Hey, Justin, I see your hand. If you want to come off with me, we'd love to hear from you.
Yes, hello. I'm curious about a multi-agent approach and maybe just some recommendations of handing a planner agent to an executor agent with semantic kernel. I know there's some multi-agent architectures, but I'm kind of bound to using .NET 4.8. So I'm just wondering if anyone has any suggestions, whether it's in the system prompt, in the functions that are being called, or with the orchestration in the class of this, kind of where maybe people have seen the best so far multi-agent interaction.
Yeah, there's a couple of samples. I also see Chris is on. Chris, do you want to dive in? Hey, Chris, are you able to hear us on the multi-agent question?
It's okay.
We may follow up, Justin. Looks
Sorry.
like Chris may not be able to hear
I
us.
stepped away for a minute. What was the question?
I was just curious, the best approach to a multi-agent orchestration, right? Is it in the system prompt? Is it in the class? Is it, kind of where people are seeing success with those interactions? I see some weird loops right now, which is why I'm trying to fine tune that, I guess, would be where I'm coming from.
system prompts with multi-agent. I didn't.
Yeah, I can give you an example. So I have the planner agent, I have an executor agent, right? The planner comes up with the plan, then the executor agent executes. One problem that I did solve kind of was I say hello, right? Well, the planner agent would then go through and, tell the executor agent to complete this task, and the task is to say hello, right? Well, it does that 10 times and fails. So I created a function that checks if the user's saying hi now, but I didn't know if there was, is that the best approach, functions, or is it the orchestration side of it, how I'm kind of handing it off, or maybe it just as simple as changing the system prompt.
I mean, just like with anything, once you get into it, it's going to require some tuning and some experimentation. Anytime I set up a new multi-agent scenario, I'm always a little bit surprised, that, they're not doing quite what I expected. And so there's a little bit of iteration and tuning. But for the specific case that you called out, if responding to the user input with kind of a plan and executing the plan is only one possible response, you might be missing an agent, missing an abstraction in terms of, like, for instance, you could use like a handoff pattern to kind of have a controller agent decide, is this something I need to execute a plan, or is this something I can respond to? Kind of a hub and spoke type approach. If because you have your planner being kind of the frontline agent, and it's set up with preference to kind of move forward and follow its instructions, that could be influencing a lot of what you're seeing in terms of alternate responses.
Cool. Thank you very much for that. Yes.
Yep.
Great. Thanks so much for the question. I'm just looking in chat to see if there's anything else that is coming in. While I'm doing that, does anyone else want to come off of me? Are there any other questions that folks have?
I have a general question on the MCP. Has anyone kind of hosted a MCP containerized, like a playwright hosted as a container app, and then the semantic kernel as the client calling the MCP server? Because most of the examples are all on locally running. And I'm trying to implement something where I could call a remotely using SSE, remotely hosted server to do some playwright kind of for an RPA scenario. So is there any sample or recommendations?
Yeah, Raj, that's something that I'm looking into too. This is even same thing, right? Host it out just like in the container as an API endpoint, right? But one thing before that is I want to make sure that it is protected, right? Before I throw it out there. So that's where I'm kind of doing a little bit of exploratory work. But your use case is exactly directionally where I'm kind of heading to.
Thanks for that, both of you. I'm going to turn over to Sergey for some of the MCP work from there too to dive in further.
So in the semantic kernel repo, I believe you can hear me, right?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. So in semantic kernel repo, we don't have a sample showing how to host MCP server as an SSE server somewhere in Azure Container app. And again, so there is no sample showing how to access SSE remote SSE server, but there's very good sample in the MCP C# SDK repo, where they have ASP.NET Core app with two liners. One is creating an MCP server out of the ASP.NET Core app, and the second one is creating two endpoints, like a get and set, and get and post, sorry, which basically needed in order to MCP protocol to work. So I believe you can look at that sample if you're not already.
Yeah, that was pretty easy to kind of get started. Yeah, I was able to kind of get that up and running, right, and call it from the NCP, the inspector, right, call the SSE there. And I have a little bit of things, with the security SSL stuff that I'm kind of, working around. Because we have, our own, certs. So, but yeah, to your point, yeah, getting it as an SSE endpoint and up and running as an out of process thing, like a API, that was, I would say, pretty painless, right?
And like at the moment, MCP is kind of like working on the authentication story, so it's not fully fleshed yet. There is like a big PR with a lot of people reviewing that PR, but at the moment, what is being recommended from the authentication and authorization point of view is like a put gateway in front of your app until the authentication story on the MCP side is fully ready. I'll put a link into the chat pointing to the README file from which you can find the different links to the MCP C# library, to the authentication story, and you can use those in order just to familiarize yourself with the way how the web app can be created and configured to be secure.
So just to kind of pick your brain on that, right? Direction, because the core requirement that we have, just to add, what Raj is, we want to kind of host it separately, but at the same time, right? Think of it like we have really want to kind of have the call be done something like an on behalf of flow, right? Where the token gets passed on, the auth token gets passed on to the MCP server, and the MCP server in turn, makes a call to the tool on behalf of the user, right? So again, I'm kind of thinking of kind of using MSAL, over there along with the MCP server. In any thoughts there directionally?
I think it should work because, like, again, so it's just like a regular ASP.NET Core app.
Yes.
And at least at the moment, I don't see the reasons why it shouldn't work. So I believe you should try and enable it and see.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly, in fact, that's on my to-do list for tinkering, this week. And this is my, directly how I plan to kind of do it. I hope to kind of, make some progress. And next week, definitely will have some follow-up questions depending upon, how the explore goes.
And like, please follow up the link, so I'm going to find and put in the chat, because like that link points into the PR regarding the enabling authentication. And like, again, so looking at the PR, looking at the comment and the PR description, it just has a bunch of other links where like people discussing the problems with authentication. So before experimenting, just like familiarize yourself with this area and maybe just give you clues, and like you'll have more information about that.
Is that here? Do you have the PR here? I think just maybe I kind of lost it in the chat.
I haven't shared it yet. I'm going to in a second.
In particular, the one that I'm interested in is the Playwright, because that's a headless browser, so automatically goes and goes to a website and does a search and returns and uses LLM. In that scenario, I don't know how this thing works. Will it work in a container, or if anyone has tried?
Be honest, I've never tried it. But I would like to get more details about your scenario, and if you can go and create an issue describing it, that would be a very good start, I think. So we can look from our side on it.
Any other questions folks have? If not, we'll go ahead and end office hours for this week. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. We really appreciate it.